William Morris, Chapter 10, The End, Part 3. I have experienced few feelings more satisfying in my professional life than the one you get when you head into the office with a simple objective and a straightforward plan for achieving it. You enjoy a sense of purpose and self-worth that has become more and more elusive to me the further I've gone into my career. In the beginning, the mission was so simple. You answer the phones and book appointments, and dodge the occasional landmine or airborne stapler aimed at your head. But it soon became more amorphous. My job in subsequent years was about finding material and building relationships, and I often showed up at the office with little sense of how to accomplish that. Do you spend the morning reading Publishers Weekly and chipping away at that stack of scripts? Or do you update your tracking list, making calls to other development execs to find out what spec scripts might be coming out soon? For me, this largely meant calling Kara Francis and having her download her meticulously harvested data in a friendly and gossipy chat. Sometimes it seemed the smartest move was to just spend the morning trying to find out who was having a party that weekend and how I might get myself invited. Part of the problem was I was never quite sure what I wanted. Did I want to ascend the corporate ladder, collecting scalps and practicing the art of war? Or did I want to hone my craft, devoting myself to the solitary toil that is the life of the writer? I'm still not sure what I want, and that's half the problem. Back then, I would sometimes just get overwhelmed by the sheer wealth of options and end up sitting paralyzed at my desk, doing completely nothing, all at once. But the morning after I hired the baby nurse, I headed into my office at William Morris with one simple objective. I was going to secure Roseanne Barr's baby for Sherma Gaynor. I sat at my desk and composed an email directly to John Burnham. I wasn't bothering with his assistant, though the system was set up so they would be automatically copied. I was going straight to the man. After all, this was the woman who took care of his spawn. He'd be only too thrilled to hear from me and facilitate this win-win in brand management and relationship building. I worked and reworked that email, suffering over every syllable, as I tried to strike the right balance between solicitousness and presumption that would make the request impossible to turn down. I was just on the verge of screwing up enough courage to press send, the final second reread provoking no alterations, when my phone rang. It was my boss. It seems crazy, but I don't think we had spoken since I had dropped the baby nurse off at his house. Mind you, this was in the days before email and cell phones, and so people were more accustomed to letting go of their control issues and assuming family and friends would act within the boundaries of generally accepted sane and normal behavior. If they said they would be somewhere at 4, you assumed they would be there at 4. Besides, you couldn't text every 5 seconds to find out how close they were. I must have told Rick my plan, and he accepted that I would execute it sanely, and I had. That's the way the world usually worked back then. He sounded much calmer this morning, and he was profuse in his thanks. I had been a real lifesaver. He didn't know how he could ever repay me. These were the words assistants lived for, and I was thrilled to feel that I had earned them. I was amazed that I'd been able to come through. And yet, his joy did not quite burn with the kind of purity I had been anticipating. Something was clearly holding him back, and he let me know what it was. Carol Ann's not out of the woods, he confided gravely. She's lost a lot of blood. They need to give her a transfusion. Jeez. I had no idea it had been that severe. I didn't remember seeing any blood when we were transporting her, but my imagination quickly ran to a thick crimson slick, glugging onto the bathroom floor. I started to feel faint. I'm very squeamish when it comes to blood. Well, I tried to reassure him. That's not so bad. You're in the hospital. They know what they're doing. She'll be okay. This, apparently, was not the answer he was looking to hear, and I could sense some mild frustration that I was incapable of keeping up with the plot. Yeah, he said, meaning the exact opposite. The problem is that we can't be sure about the blood supply here. Beat, as we say in the writing craft. We can't be sure that it's safe. And suddenly I understood what he was talking about. This was the 90s. It was at or near the height of the AIDS epidemic, and everyone was terrified they might contract the incurable virus. You could get it from unprotected sex, intravenous drug use, and, it was suspected at this point, infected blood supplies in the hospital blood banks. It was a horrifying prospect, the stores of regenerative life force becoming the very source of the disease. I could barely get my head around the problem, let alone a solution. Thankfully, my boss was way ahead of me. What people are doing, he told me, is creating their own private blood supplies. I was still lost. We can get donors to donate blood specifically for Carol Ann, he explained. Do you think you could do that? As I already mentioned, I am incredibly squeamish around blood. There was no way I was interested in doing this myself, but I was a good foot soldier, and my job was to make shit happen. I was happy to wrangle donors, even if it was for a cause I was not willing to support myself. Sure, I offered. And then there was another pregnant pause as he sought to find the right words to navigate this next most delicate of conundrums. It's just we want the right donors, you know? Right. I said compatible blood types and whatnot. Do we have that information? Yes, yes, of course, he answered, his impatience mounting as he gave me his wife's blood type. But what I mean, Nick, is we want people whose blood we believe is safe. Do you understand what I'm saying? I started to laugh, a dark, gallows laughter, as I understood exactly what he was saying. I have a solid moral compass. I know the difference between right and wrong. But knowing the difference doesn't necessarily mean living up to it. Conviction is how we behave when our morals are inconvenient. My conviction is often wanting. I knew there was no way we could possibly tell whose blood was safe. There was no way we could know who engaged in lifestyle choices that might put them at higher risk of contracting HIV. The only means available to us for evaluating the safety of the blood supply we were planning to solicit was to rely on crass stereotyping, gossip, and innuendo. I knew this was morally repugnant, but my dark laughter was my tacit acknowledgement that I also knew I was not above it. We were in the talent business. Gossip and innuendo were our currency. But first things first, I knew there had to be people in my immediate circle who I could vouch for, who I trusted were practicing safe sex and were not intravenous drug users. Well, there was at least one person, my girlfriend, Marie Schley, who would go on to become my wife. I called her up. We had been on several dates by this point and had known each other since high school, but we weren't exactly dating. If you know Marie, you also know that she's one of the most generous people in the world and will do anything for the people she loves. She was like, "No fucking way, Nick. Are you out of your mind?" She wasn't wild about the agency life, the long hours, the low pay, the total bullshit. She basically thought we were all vampires. I guess I was proving her point. I think she might have even asked if there was no low to which I would not stoop. For the record, there really isn't. Still, I sweet talked and cajoled her until she agreed to at least find out if her blood type was a match. You never take no in the flesh trade, even when you're trying to get blood from your future wife. She said she'd get back to me. For the record, she ultimately proved to be a compatible donor and might have participated in this blood drive, but the window of opportunity had passed by then. This was a fast moving train. I was 0 for 1. It was time to break out the big guns. You know where this is going, but even though the circumstances were even more dire, I couldn't just email all because we could only profile the people we actually knew. So I sent an email to MoPic LA, the entire motion picture department in Los Angeles, and the responses poured in. There were a surprisingly high number of matches. I made a list. You make a lot of lists in Hollywood. Writer avails, director avails, actor avails, blood donor avails. I then called my boss and we vetted it for suitable matches. Boys were basically discounted completely, even the heterosexual ones. It was like, "Chris. What do you think about Chris?" Probably straight, but kind of gnarly, right? Like, who knows what he's really up to? And let's face it, this is the way we feel about most dudes. They're basically shady creeps. We were much more forgiving with the girls. Christina? These aren't their real names, by the way. She seems like a wholesome kid from the Midwest, right? Let's book her. And pretty soon we had 5 women committed to giving blood to Carol Ann. I don't think any agents committed to the donor pool. They were too busy with staff meetings and murder plots. But I met the 5 female assistants in the lobby of WMA, and we all piled into my dad's old Beamer and drove down to Cedars. It's wild how careers evolve in Hollywood. You can find famous actors as they set out on the early steps of their career in bit parts all over the internet. Jonathan Banks in Airplane, anyone? Assistants are the same. People you shared long, suffering glances with in endless development meetings. I'm looking at you, Emma Watts. Go on to run studios. I can't remember exactly who was in that car. Please shout out if it was you. I am terrible with faces, and as I've already stated, on most days I was wrestling just to stay sane. But I can tell you the crew included at least one future UTA partner, Teresa Peters, with whom I still laugh about this insane event every time we cross paths at film festivals or around the city. I think none of us imagined literally giving our blood for our careers, and yet here we were, ready and willing to do it. I ushered our crew up to the blood donation site, my nascent producing skills beginning to find form, and checked us in with the powers that be. I hadn't checked myself in with the reception because it turned out my blood type wasn't a match. I was just a driver, a facilitator. So I watched as, one by one, my team were called into the donation center to perform their sacred task. Meanwhile, I began to feast on the plethora of free snacks the hospital offered in the waiting room. Packets of cookies and crackers and juice to keep your blood sugar up for the ordeal. William Morris had been a food desert. There were no snacks in the building, except during that one week they offered free bulk nuts and granola, and the employees devoured them with so much rapidity, like a marauding pack of raccoons, scattering cashew and rice cracker debris all over the carpets, that management immediately ceased the practice. So I'd come to really appreciate a free snack. I was midway through my third packet of Keebler Vienna sandwiches when the receptionist suddenly cleared her throat in my direction. I looked up, crumbs tumbling from my gob. "So are you donating blood today?" she asked, her tone smug and imperious. I shook my head no. "The snacks," she continued pointedly, "are only for people who are donating blood." "Oh," I apologized. "I'm not the correct blood type. I just brought everyone here to donate." This felt to me like ample explanation. Surely, as the driver of so many generous patrons, I had earned the privilege of a couple cookies. She didn't see it that way. "We need donations for all types of blood, not just the type of your specific recipient." There was a clear note of judgment in her voice. She did not seem to approve of our elitist ploy to keep all the good blood for ourselves. In fact, it felt like she was telling me that we owed her, and coughing up some blood was the very least of what was expected. What's more, I felt trapped. I felt caught. I felt busted. I was like Persephone tricked into eating the pomegranate seeds in the underworld, and now I knew the only way to get out was to open my veins. The nurse grinned, a thin sliver of victory, as I stood and signed the requisite forms of consent. I was in. Walking into the donation area felt like walking into the giant storage facility in that 70s paranoid thriller Coma. Bed after bed of supine bodies connected to tubes, sucking the literal lifeblood from their veins. I tried to maintain a kind of tunnel vision, virtual blinders protecting me from the spectacle, as I slid into a small study carrel for the pre-procedure interrogation of my travel history and sexual past. For the record, neither were terribly colorful, and it was only a matter of seconds before my interrogator pricked my finger to test my blood for iron. I doubt they perform this test anymore, considering you can now give yourself a full STI panel in any airport lavatory. But the way it worked back then was they took from your finger a single droplet of blood and let it fall into a small glass vial of solution. If it sank to the bottom of the vial, you had adequate iron to give blood. If not, you were disqualified. The pinprick didn't bother me, but then I watched in horror and consternation as this single tiny globule from my body fell into the vial and began its slow descent. It maintained a loose and wobbly bean-shaped configuration, a blob of deep violet hue collecting bubbles and growing cilia as it drifted with evil intent toward the bottom. It was like an alien life form struggling for breath in the vast ocean of a distant orb. It was also the most disgusting thing I'd ever seen, and I began to lose consciousness. This was not the first time I had ever fainted at the sight of blood. For me, the symptoms begin with a bout of uncontrollable laughter, which soon morphs into a relentless cycle of frantically rubbing my extremities. I look like Billy Bibbit in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. I then sweat right through my clothes until my sight begins to fade, the peripheral vision going gray, and I lose sight completely and pass out. My nurse seemed unfamiliar with this progression of events, growing more and more uneasy as I cackled and rubbed myself in the chair opposite her. It was only when the sweat started darkening my shirt front that she clued in. "My God," she exclaimed, "are you about to faint?" I nodded, desperately, plaintively. "Over one drop of blood?" She said this with such contempt. I found it hard to believe that this had never happened before, especially considering how aggressively vile this one drop of blood had proved to be. Surely most sane people reacted the way I was. But maybe they didn't. One of my bigger fears has always been that I am, mostly unbeknownst to myself, completely mad. I tried to pull my shit back together. I tried to give myself a reality check. Unfortunately, that check involved taking another glance at the alien being swimming malevolently toward the depths. It was too much. "I can't do it," I exclaimed, and fled through the coma ward and back into the reception area, where I collapsed in a cold sweat on the carpeted floor. It was humiliating, but it was over. I couldn't really explain what had happened to my colleagues as they filed back in, their missions complete. I didn't really bother either. It didn't matter. My tenure was over. My trip to the hospital had really been my last detail, and I had accomplished it with all the requisite skill and flexibility one could possibly muster after a year of intensive training in the dark arts of emotional manipulation and crisis management at the Jedi Academy of Craven Human Behavior. I was proud of my work. I had kept up with the ever unfolding drama, and my stamina had never flagged in the face of a rapidly evolving narrative. So what I couldn't stomach the gore? So what I wasn't ready to spill my blood on the holy altar of the 10%? It was all just further evidence that this agency business was not for me. And if I was ever going to find out what it was I truly wanted, I would have to move on. I did eventually, though, send that email to John Burnham on behalf of Sherma Gaynor, but I never had a chance to follow up. As soon as I left WMA, I was locked out of their email system, and email, to my knowledge, didn't exist anywhere else. But if you were going to bet, I'd bet on Sherma Gaynor. She knew what she wanted, and that's half the game.